If I'm retired before 60, when I can access my super, how do I know how much I really need? How do I know it's safe to pull the trigger? This is possibly one of the toughest decisions that we need to make. So at what point in your life do you know I've got enough and I can now afford to toast my future earnings? That's much less of a tough question at 55 or 60 than it is at 35 or 40. So at 35 or 40, you're giving up a lot more future earning potential, and so you need a greater certainty of what the future is going to look like. You need to be able to deal with much greater variability in your income. And so if you've developed a spending plan that's based on extreme frugality and you haven't yet passed through some of life's biggest changes, which I call coupling, nesting and parenting, the uncertainty over what your future spending needs might be probably outweigh the uncertainties over longevity or over market returns. So the assumption you put into the spending bit is critical. In working out how much enough is enough, to my mind, enough is not a number. You actually need three things. You need enough money to sleep at night, you need enough purpose to get up in the morning, and you need enough joy to sustain you through the day. And you cannot summarize that up in a single number. Looking at the situation of somebody who's closer to 60, 50, 55, or a more typical retirement age, which is usually in the late 50s, there you have a period of time that you need to support with non-super based investments, and also to get you to 67 when you may qualify for some age pension. So you need to have a combination of money investments outside super, which will get you to age 60, money in super, which you can access from 60, and then potentially the age pension from age 67. And those buckets need to be separately planned. In terms of when it's safe to pull the trigger, many people talk about the so-called 4% rule as a way of determining how much money I can take out of my portfolio. And that's based on determining what's called a safe withdrawal rate. That is, what percentage of my initial pot can I withdraw and then increase that come hell or high water by inflation each year. So if I have $1 million, 4% of $1 million is $40,000. So in year one, I might take $40,000. In year two, after 3% inflation, I might take $41,200, and so on and so on. And the 4% observation was based on the worst possible 30 years in the last 120. So it looked at a retiree retiring in 1969 when we went into a period of very low growth and very high inflation. And so those retirees did much worse than anyone else, including retirees who retired in 1929, the great stock market crash. And that's because through the 30s, we may not have had much investment growth, but we actually had negative inflation for some of that period. So it didn't look quite so bad to a retiree with a fixed spending threshold. The other flaw in the analysis is that it was based on a US investor in a tax-free environment, invested in a 60-40 portfolio, that's 60% growth, 40% bonds. And that's not how a typical retiree would be invested. And of course, if you haven't hit 60, you're not tax-free. And you may be, even post-60, earning returns from non-super investments. It also ignores the flaw that the age pension puts under that withdrawal. So if your goal is to spend $49,000 a year and you're a couple with a home, you actually don't need any savings because the age pension is going to give you $49,000 a year indexed to inflation from age 67 till the last of you dies. If, on the other hand, your goal is to spend $150,000 a year, the safety net provided by the age pension is much less significant compared to the pot of money you need to generate $150,000. And so you'll be able to deal with a much lower safe withdrawal level. And the other key flaw in the argument is that it does assume that people continue to spend the same amount of money indexed for inflation every year through their retirement period. And that's not what happens in the real world. In practice, most people's spending declines with age. You can sort of divide retirement into three broad phases. The initial piece where your spending might actually increase compared to when you were working, and I call those the go-go years. In your 70s, 80s, your willingness and desire and ability to spend starts to decline, so I call those the slow-go years. And then at some point, you lose a lot of the ability to spend, so that's what I call the no-go years. And so over that period, your spending does decline. And I've also not met somebody who is willing to continue to spend at that rate, knowing that their pot of money is getting depleted. So it's a useful starting point for a 60-year-old retiree. Whether it's 3%, 4%, 5% or 6%, whatever number you pick, it is a good starting point as a rule of thumb. But there's no substitute for a true probability-based estimate which takes into account the level of spending relative to the age pension. And of course taking into account your life expectancy. So, whilst you're at 60, you probably have a 1 in 4 chance that one or other of you will make it to 95. That's the equivalent of getting 2 heads in a row flipping a coin. So how lucky do you feel? And then there's what adjustments you're prepared to make along the way, and how much of that spending is flexible. So the concept of dropping your spending from $150,000 a year to $130,000 a year is probably a much lesser impact on your lifestyle than dropping your spending from $70,000 to $50,000. In the first case, it might be the difference between how many holidays you have in a year. It might be whether you turn left or right on the plane. But dropping from 70 to 50 might very well be a switch from Wagyu and Shiraz to beer and berries. So this is a personal decision, and the key variables are how much is your spending and whether you're trying to decide how much of my pot do I spend, or am I ready to toast my future earnings?